All right, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good night, whatever it may be for you. Right now it is Sunday afternoon, hence the church-like garb I have on. And I thought, what better way to enjoy this snowy afternoon than with going over Genesis 16. That's how far we are along. So, let's get right into it. This one should be quick and easy. There's not a whole lot to it, and it's only, what is it, like 15 verses, so it's pretty easy. And this is the story of Hagar and Ishmael, who's the father of the Arabs. So, let's get into it. Also, Ishmael is the firstborn son of Abraham, as he becomes known later. Verses 1 through 2. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaiden, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarah. I bet he did. All right, so right away there, getting into it. First thing, the Hagar, the Egyptian maidservant of Sarah. Legend, their documents, their writings, she was given to Sarah by the Pharaoh when they were in Egypt, and there's actually a lot of accounts that it's actually one of Pharaoh's sisters. And this ties into the line of Ham, possibly Canaan, and possibly why Ishmael, he's not really cursed, but he doesn't have the greatest of blessings, let's put it that way. And we'll get into it. And then Sarah, we see here that she has doubt. I don't mean to offend anyone, but come on, ladies. So far, though, you're not looking too good in the Bible. I know a lot of women will argue the Bible is very sexist. I don't think so. We'll get into, obviously, it just talks bad about when a woman does bad, but it also talks about when a man does bad. And here, Sarah is a woman, and just so happens in this case, she starts having doubt. Now notice it's not Abram saying that he wants to be with Hagar. It's Sarah coming to him and pretty much begging him. And it says so that she can obtain a child through her maidservant, which is sketchy to me. Like, that just sounds bad, you know. No matter how much I've researched and looked into what she's trying to say, she's basically trying to say, have sex with my handmaiden so that you can get her pregnant, but then I get to raise the kid. So it's pretty sketchy from the get-go. You know, not that Sarah's a bad, not a patriarch or matriarchal type character, but it just shows that she has doubt and flaws, just as Abram did, just as every one of the patriarchs and matriarchs of the Bible does. Well, let's move on to verse 3. So verse 3 says, And Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband to be his wife. Verse 4, And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived, and she saw that she had conceived, and her mistress was despised in her eyes. All right. So again, yeah, I'm guessing it was a real hard decision for Abram here. He's got a hot wife, and now his wife tells him to, hey, have another wife who's pretty good looking in and of her own right. You can get with her. It's okay with me. Now, men, I'm not saying to be lustful or anything like that, but every man here can kind of see why it wasn't too hard for Abram to say yes. Now, was that the right thing to do? Obviously not. He should have kept the faith as well. He and Sarah both showed doubt here. And it does lead to turmoil. It leads to strife. Sin leads to strife. But God always finds a way to make good out of the evil that we commit. I love how the Bible, I've said it from the get-go, how subtle they are. Notice how it says, And he went in unto Hagar. You know what that means. But once she conceived and once she was pregnant, her mistress was despised in her eyes. So she hated Sarah as soon as she saw that she conceived. Now, this may be justified because she may have been well aware that Sarah meant to take the child and raise her as her own. And that could have been why. But as we'll get in, and I think that might have been the origin of it, I really do. But as we'll see, we'll get into it more and more. It's not so much that Sarah initially sees that, okay, it's Hagar's child, and Abram took her as his wife. So really what starts happening is Hagar starts wanting to be Abram's bottom bitch, wants to be his main squeeze, wants to be his number one gal, and that's not the plan. That's not the way it was supposed to be. And Sarah saw that Hagar wanted to do this. Hagar is the one, though, read it again here. Her mistress was despised in her eyes. Hagar despised her mistress. Now again, could have been because she saw that she was planning on raising this child as her own. But as we get further into this reading, you'll see it's because she hated that Sarah was the beloved of Abram. She wanted to be Abram's beloved. She wanted to be his main squeeze. But it was Sarah. Sarah's the one he loved. And Hagar did not like that. And she even would try using the fact that she had his son, holding that over Sarah throughout, that especially more in the next few verses. And of course that makes Sarah feel awful. The whole reason she had Hagar and Abram get together so that Abram could have lineage, could have children. But again, it was because of her doubt of the promise that God had made. And Abram's doubt as well. In fact, in the beginning here, Hagar is the innocent one. She becomes not so innocent, but sin leads to sin. Now, again, we'll show how God turns sin into good, but remember that. Sarah and Abram's doubt led to kind of the destruction of Hagar in a lot of ways. It's a sad way to look at it, but it's really what it is. And it's a reminder that our sin has a rippling effect that we don't always notice and can't be aware of. And it will often lead to more and more and more strife. All right, so moving on, verse 5 through 6. And Sarah said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom, and when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. So she's asking Abram to, telling Abram, the Lord judge, which one shall it be, me or her? And Abram here then says in verse 6, But Abram said unto Sarah, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand, do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarah dealt hardly with her, harshly or hardly with her, she fled from her face. So Hagar ran away. So basically what happens, Hagar gets all uppity with Sarah and wants to be Abe's main squeeze. And Sarah sees this, and she goes to Abraham, telling him that, I made a mistake, this shouldn't have happened. Now Hagar is looking at me and despising me, not listening to me or any of this stuff. God needs to judge between the two of us. And this is just a typical guy right here. Abraham's like, look, she's your maidservant, you deal with her, okay? You deal with her in whatever way you see fits or whatever you think is best. I don't want to touch this thing. It's your idea from the get-go. And what a typical male response. I mean, it's just funny to me how, she comes and complains, and he's like, you deal with it. So she does, and she deals kind of harshly. She probably just went to Hagar and said, hey, I don't care if you are pregnant with Abraham's child. I'm his wife. I'm his first wife. I am the one that was chosen by God, basically, to be his wife. Now, you may be the mother of his child, but I'm still the one that he loves. And you need to treat me with respect still. You're still my maidservant. Because obviously maidservants and all these servants of Abraham's were having kids. None of them had a kid by Abraham, so that was a first. But that's what made Hagar think that she now was above Sarah. And she was like, nah, it's not the way it is. So Hagar runs away. Verse 7. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarah. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. So we'll get into it later, but Abraham has another meeting with the Word, with God, with Jesus, and basically the Word, God promises them that Isaac, his seed through Isaac's line will be a great nation, And Ishmael will also be a great nation, but not quite as numerous as his. And we see this throughout history. It comes true. But Ishmael is not meant to be ahead of Isaac as far as greatness and prowess, as far as the prophecy goes. And we see here, moving on, but also, before I go on, I guess, he tells her to go back and submit herself to Sarah. And a lot of us can look at this with our modern values and virtues and say, that's wrong, shouldn't have to be anyone's servant. But I don't agree with that. I think we are people's servants. First of all, we serve those around us. And Sarah and Abraham served the people who served them. They had to take care of the people underneath of them. Hagar was getting uppity, getting out of place, thinking that she should have more power than she deserved. And remember, she more than likely didn't know how to be a leader, how to serve. She knew how to be a maidservant, but she didn't know how to take care of those underneath of her. That's why God ordained that Sarah and Abraham would, because they knew how to take care of the people underneath them, as well as be, those people then would take care of them. Hagar didn't see it that way. Hagar came from the Egyptian culture where it was more of elitism. You serve me because I deserve to be served, not because I'm a good leader who takes care of you. And that was kind of the rule that would have happened if Hagar had become Abraham's main squeeze. So the angel says, no, look, I'll bless your seed. Your seed will be exceedingly numerous, but you have to go and submit yourself to Hagar. First of all, you're going to die in the wilderness if you don't. You don't have anyone to take care of you. So go there, submit yourself to Sarah, serve underneath her. This isn't like slavery servant. Obviously, she was left, and then she came back. It's that you have to be humble yourself underneath of Sarah and Abraham, because they're the ones who truly know God's message and know how to be true leaders, versus Hagar, who was in a different culture, didn't know how to be a true leader. And that's why she was not meant to be the mother of the patriarchs under Abraham. Moving on, verse 10. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. Verse 11. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, which means God shall hear, because God heard her weeping in the wilderness here. Because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. Verse 12. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man against him. And he will dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So, I said earlier, Ishmael becomes the father of the Arab nation, of Arabs. And it talks about him becoming a wild man. So what we know about Ishmael is he does become a wild man. He becomes a hunter and an archer, and his descendants become the Arabs, which never submit. You get the Medes, the Assyrians, the Persians. These Arab people, they constantly are out in the wilderness. They don't submit. In fact, not to make fun of the Arabs or to make fun of the Ishmael line or anything like that, but these are the ones who are constantly raiding the caravans going through the Silk Road and stuff. These Arabs were the ones who were never submitted themselves to a societal structure. They are always a wilderness, always out and living in the wild as a wild man. And it says here, his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So he's dwelling in the presence of Isaac's people, of Isaac's line, but he never submits to them. So Genesis 16:12, it talks about this. Mentions more about in Genesis 21:20 and Genesis 21:21 about what happens to Ishmael and his line. And again, we know the history of the Arab people, and we know that they at least believe, and we can track it pretty well, that they are the descendants of Ishmael, who live in the wilderness, who never submit to another nation. In fact, they even continued to make the Turks pay tribute for their trip to the Mecca all the time, for their holy, because that's one of their holy sites, the Turks. And the Arabs, I mean, they do and don't have religion. They're not a set religion of the Arab people. They are in the wilderness against every man pretty much throughout history. They will not submit to any kind of nation structure or anything like that. Throughout their history, this is the way that they are, and the Bible predicts it. And it's just crazy how, and I don't see, it's not said as a curse. It's not said as because they're necessarily evil or anything like that. It's just shows the prophetic power of the Bible, how they're able to identify what is going to come of this lineage. And we think about it, it makes sense, because Ishmael doesn't get to inherit, Isaac gets to inherit. And he kind of always is a bit butthurt about that. So he's living in the land of his brethren, always against his brethren, because he is mad that he didn't get the inheritance. And again, a lot of the reason he doesn't get the inheritance, well, it wasn't ordained by God. And it wasn't ordained by God because his mother, who, the Bible, if you're not aware, the Bible makes this clear, and it's obvious. Kids are raised by their moms. Their moms kind of make them into who they are. You know, they see the example of their father, and that's who they want to be. But their mom is the one that raises them. This is with Jacob. This is with this is the way the Bible sets it up. This is the way the structure of the family is meant to be, at least according to the Bible. And Hagar was from a totally different society, like I said, who were much more elitist. And we shouldn't have to serve. We should never have to. In order to be a good leader, you have to serve. You know, the least among us is the first among us, that sort of thing. And this is the knowledge that Abraham had, and his wife Sarah was aware of as well. And that's why they were good leaders. And that's why Sarah was able to raise Isaac knowing and understanding this. Hagar did not raise Ishmael knowing and understanding this. She raised him to think that he deserved it purely because of he was this firstborn son of Abraham. And that's why he deserved it. Boom, that's why. And that's why his descendants, the Arabs, never submit. That's why he's a wild man in the wilderness. Instead of just being, you know, his own nation, you know, in his own structure and following God's way, he's constantly, especially his descendants more and more so after him, mad, basically, mad that they didn't get the inheritance. We see this again with Jacob and his twin Esau. When Jacob gets the blessing and not Esau, for a while Esau is angry, but there is at least it made it seem as though later in life, when their father Isaac dies, they come back together to bury him, and they kind of bury the hatchet. But Esau's descendants do not. And that's the same thing with Ishmael. You know, Ishmael's may have forgiven Isaac, and they may not have struggled. There are different interpretations, different writings that say different things. But what we do know is their descendants were pissed. Esau's descendants were pissed at Jacob's descendants, and Ishmael's descendants were pissed at Isaac's descendants. Like, this isn't fair. This is bullcrap. We should have inherited this. We should have gotten the blessing. And it would have no reason or sacrifice or whatsoever, simply because elitism. We deserve it because we deserve it. And God doesn't work that way. You know, the reason, again, Sarah and Abraham's child later on is chosen and not Hagar's child is because Hagar raises the child in a way that is totally kind of counter to what God believes. Now, Ishmael is raised by Abraham as well, but you have to understand Abraham is running this entire group of people. Like, he's in charge of, at this point, thousands of people underneath him that he has to take care of. So it is like a guy running, you know, a general who has a kid. And he obviously loves his kid, and he's trying to be there for his kid, but he has to take care of the whole society itself that's underneath of him. So Sarah has to take care of the kid. Hagar has to take care of the kid. And as we see, Hagar despises Sarah as soon as she conceived, meaning Sarah doesn't get to have any power at all in raising the child. Now, have Hagar not despised him and been willing to allow Sarah and to possibly the two of them work together to raise the child, she could have been more brought into the light of Christ's message, of God's message, of what it means to be a good leader. And maybe things would have been different. But that's not the way it was. And God knew that wasn't the way it was going to be. All right, moving on. Verse 13, and she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? Wherefore the well she called Bir Lahai Rui, which translates to the well of him that liveth and seeth me. It is between Kadesh and Bered. Verse 15, And Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. So he's an old man, has his first child after Sarah convinced him to have sex with another woman, is basically what just happened here. She gets jealous, thinks she should be the main squeeze, and she gave him a kid, and Sarah didn't. Abraham's like, no, that's not the way it is. I still love Sarah, and Sarah, you deal with her however you see fit. And Sarah deals with her basically by telling her off, like telling her, hey, you may be pregnant with this kid, but I'm still his wife. I'm still the one he loves. I'm still the head of his household along with him. Hagar doesn't like this. She gets uppity, runs away. Angel of the Lord comes to her, tells her, hey, you got to go back. You got to submit yourself to Sarah, which we'll see she does, but she doesn't at the same time. And, she doesn't fully take to heart this message. But it just goes to show here a few lessons. The first one is don't have doubt. Okay? Don't doubt. It leads to sin. Doubt in your heart and acting upon that doubt leads to sin, which leads to turmoil, which leads to strife. I mean, these Arab people were a constant strife, even unto this day. And again, I'm not putting down Arab people. That Arab people can accept Christ and be saved, and they're not bad inherently. But the Arab peoples never have had a nation. I mean, look at Palestine. The Palestinians still don't have a nation. They never have had a nation. The nation of Palestine has never existed. These people have always been wild men of the wilderness. These were the ones that the knights in the Crusades always had to protect the pilgrims from. Isn't it just like Muslims in general? It was these Arab people, because their whole way of life was robbing these caravans sort of thing, because they saw everyone else there as the descendants of Isaac, and that this was not fair. Screw these people. We're going to go against them. And it all comes back to Sarah and Abram's doubt and the sin of their doubt. Now, Ishmael is, again, I won't sit here and say that he was necessarily evil at all, but I will say that Hagar raised him in a way that was different than Sarah raised Isaac. Hagar raised him with a bit of malice and jealousy and elitism, whereas Isaac was raised knowing and learning the Word of God and how to serve and lead. You can't lead and be served if you're not willing to serve and be last. And this is the message of Christ, obviously. And this is what Isaac was able to understand, something that Ishmael never was, because he always was under his mother Hagar's point of view, which was of the Egyptian culture, which is your blood status is what matters. You were born of me, Hagar, possibly the princess of Egypt, and Abram, who is the leader of these people. So therefore, you're the firstborn. You should inherit. And nothing about what it means to be a good leader was really ever taught to him. God knew this was coming ahead of time, but he also didn't want to curse Hagar and Ishmael exactly. He wanted Hagar to go back and be taken care of, at least now while the child was young. Because Ishmael's people do play a role. They really do. And plenty of Ishmael's descendants did come around to see the light of Christ's message, of Abraham's message. But for the majority, his people were constantly against every other man, because they always saw themselves of should have having this inheritance. It should have been them. And we'll see this again with, like I said, we'll see this again with Jacob and Esau. And we saw it with Cain and Abel. It's just this constant thing of jealousy, of I deserve it because I deserve it. And the other person actually deserves it. I despise, and it gets worse and worse as the generations go down. And it's really sad and weird when you think about it, because it wouldn't have been that hard for Ishmael to just be like, yeah, sure, I'll be like to Isaac what Lot was to Abraham. Lot was under Abraham, but he was also powerful and loving and caring in his own right. But Isaac never gets that teaching and understands that message. Ishmael never gets that, really understands it, because his mother is from a totally different society with different values and different virtues. It doesn't really teach him how to lead. And that's the way the families were structured. The woman raises the child, and the man takes care of the greater community at large and is an example for the child. So Ishmael gets that good example, but he doesn't necessarily get the good teachings as a child. And it gets worse and worse. Generations go on underneath Ishmael. All right, so that's chapter 16. We will move on to, guess it, 17 next. Guess where this one is? Circumcision. Oh, what a hot topic. That'll be interesting. All right, everyone, God bless and have a great evening.